Welcome to the fifth season podcast, Conversations on Successful Aging. I'm David Lowry, and I'm joined with my good friend and buddy, Don Drew. We believe aging is a privilege, and we want to have conversations on how to do it well. Hi, Don. How you doing?
I'm doing great, David, and I've got a question for you today. How are you sleeping these days?
Well, I wish I could say like a baby, but as I've gotten older, my sleep patterns have gotten way more distinctive, let's say. Maybe we'll talk more about that in the program, but let's just say I don't sleep all the way through like I used to.
Well, I get that. And at various times in our lives, many of us may have worn poor sleep like a badge of honor. There's this old saying, I'll sleep when I'm dead, right? But
Sure.
there's much softer sayings like, I've just got too much to do, or 6 hours is plenty for me. And I've heard both men and women of our generation say all those things. And the truth is, I've also said most of them myself.
Don, I was telling myself for many years that I don't really need more than about 6 hours of sleep, but I've been trying to get more, and I found that I actually do work better with more sleep than I was giving myself. There's a lot of mythology in our age group about sleeping, and the people who are really doing something with their lives are supposed to be up at 5 in the morning after maybe 4 hours of sleep, just, crushing it and everything. And let's talk about that.
What I've come to understand is that this kind of attitude may be one of the most expensive ones that we carry in a lot of different ways, but especially expensive in terms of our brain health, cardiovascular health, and emotional regulation, as well as immune function, longevity, and other things. We actually pay a bill for that mythology, and it gets paid in ways that we don't always connect back to debt. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today.
The conversation is really relevant for people in the second half of life because sleep really does change as we get older. And it's not because we need less of it. That's a myth we're going to take away today. Our biology shifts in ways that makes getting good sleep harder. If we don't understand those shifts, you can't really work with them.
Today, we want to get into what's actually happening in the aging body and brain around sleep. We want to talk about something called circadian rhythms, which is something I really think is very, very interesting. And we want to get very practical because I think our listeners deserve more than a conversation that ends with get more sleep. We want to give you something you can actually use.
And I want to start by addressing what I think is the most damaging piece of conventional wisdom around sleep and aging. And that's the widely held belief that as you get older, you just need less sleep. That 7 or 8 hours is for the young people, and that waking up at 4 in the morning and lying there is your new normal you have to deal with. That's not true, though.
I've heard this myth for years that as you get older, you need less sleep. And because I was waking up earlier than I wanted to in recent years, then struggling to get back to sleep, and because society told me that this just happens, I kind of just accepted that's the way it was. I stopped fighting it and just put up with a seemingly new reality. And maybe it's something I don't have to put up with.
I've talked to so many people who are waking up at maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and they wake up wide awake, but it's really important to look to the research and the science here that say that we need about the same amount of sleep as young folks, somewhere between 7 and 9 hours for most people. What changes isn't the need. What changes is your ability to get that or to achieve it.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction because if you believe you don't need as much sleep, you stop pursuing it, right? You stop treating it as a problem we're solving and you adapt to feeling less than your best and calling it aging.
And we don't want to make you feel bad, like, oh no, here's another problem we've got to solve, because there is a lot of that as you get older. But we want to start the program by just saying you do need between 7 and 9 hours of sleep, and you're going to have to figure this out if you really want to have the quality of life that Don and I know is possible for you. And this connects directly with things we've talked about on our show before, and that's the danger of saying, well, you're just going to decline as you get older. We don't want to normalize biological decline. Just because something becomes more common as we age doesn't mean that it has to be inevitable or that you should accept it without question.
That's one of those scripts that we talked about in our episode on rewriting the rules of aging. Someone at some point wrote the script that said older people need less sleep and wake up early, and that's just how it is. And a lot of us have been performing that script without ever asking whether it's actually true. And so that's what we're going to be doing.
Let me ask you this question. Why do so many older adults struggle with sleep, even when they really want it and they need it.
That's where it gets interesting and where we need to talk about something called circadian rhythm. That's circadian rhythm. That concept is at the center of almost everything we're going to discuss today.
Circadian rhythms are one of those concepts that people have heard about, but you may not really fully understand it. And when you understand it, it will reframe almost everything you know about sleep.
So here's the most important thing to know. Every single cell in your body has a biological clock. And I'm not speaking metaphorically, I'm speaking quite literally. There is a timing mechanism embedded in your cellular biology that governs an enormous range of processes. When your body temperature rises and falls, when cortisol peaks, when your digestive system activates, when certain hormones are released, and when your immune system is the most active.
What you have is a lot of little clocks inside of you that are going to be coordinated by the master clock in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. I probably didn't say that right, so I'm just going to move right on. The suprachiasmatic. What a wonderful phrase to know, even if you never use it again. But here's the thing, I can say this word, the hypothalamus. That's where it's located, a small almond-shaped region at the base of the brain, which is your master control center for your nervous and endocrine system. It regulates all these vital functions, including your body temperature, your hunger, thirst, sleep, emotions, and hormone release.
Yeah, and the primary signal that synchronizes that master clock, frankly, is light, specifically natural light. And when we talk about circadian rhythms, that's probably what you've heard about the most. When light enters your eyes in the morning, it sends a signal to that master clock that says it's day. Begin the cascade of processes associated with wakefulness, such as alertness and energy. When the light diminishes in the evening, the signal shifts. It's night, so it begins this cascade associated with rest, repair, and restoration.
Isn't it wonderful to think about our ancestors who lived out in the prairies and the plains and on top of mountains and in the valleys and everything? It's a beautiful and elegant system. And for most of human history, it worked really beautifully. People rose with the sun, and when it was time, they went to sleep. The circadian rhythm was kept in almost perfect synchrony with the natural world.
Yep. And then in 1879, Thomas Edison comes along and invents the electric light. And then screens, and then the particular chaos of the modern world life. And then for you and I, we started aging, which adds another layer of disruption to the system.
We love our light, don't we? We keep our lights going inside and outside and on our tablets and everything else. But let's talk about that aging piece for just a moment, because there are two major changes that happen to our circadian rhythm as we get older that every person needs to understand.
And I'm going to start with the first one, which I'll call the circadian phase advance. As we age, our internal clock actually shifts earlier, not by choice, but biologically. This is why so many older adults find themselves genuinely sleepy at 8 or 9 in the evening and wide awake at 4 or 5 in the morning. It's not a character flaw. It's actually that the clock is literally moved.
Who moved my clock? And the second change is the amplitude of the circadian rhythm. Amplitude. It's essentially how strong the signal is, and it tends to diminish with age. The contrast between the biological day signal and the biological night signal becomes less pronounced. And this means your body is less efficiently transitioning between alertness and sleep. Sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented and less restorative.
Here's the part that surprised me most when I first heard it. The circadian rhythm doesn't just govern when you feel sleepy, it governs when your brain does its essential maintenance work. There's a system called the glymphatic system. I had never heard of it before I started researching this, but it's essentially the brain's waste clearance mechanism. And that is dramatically more active when you're actually asleep. And it's doing something remarkable. It's clearing out metabolic waste products that accumulate in the brain during waking hours.
There's probably a lot to do with my brain, especially if you have a dirty old man's mind or something
Yeah.
like that. The glymphatic system. Doesn't that just sound like it's dirty, the glymphatic? I like that. It also includes proteins believed to be associated with the development of Alzheimer's disease.
When our sleep is disrupted, the circadian rhythm is dysregulated, and when we're not getting enough sleep, the brain is not efficiently clearing those waste products out. Night after night, year after year, this is accumulative, and the research connecting chronic sleep disruption with increased dementia risk is becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss.
We don't want to frighten you, But we do want to motivate you because the glymphatic system works. It really will do the job and it'll do a great job for you, provided you give it the conditions it needs to operate. That means you have to prioritize sleep in a way that most of us haven't been doing.
Yeah, it really is a form of biological self-defense. And at our age, it may be one of the most important forms of it available to us.
Let's talk about what poor sleep is actually costing us, Don, and be direct about the stakes at the moment because we need to hear not just the science, but the real world consequences. So, what does chronically poor sleep actually cost us as we age?
The list is pretty sobering, and I want to go through it not to alarm people, but because I think most of us vastly underestimate how broad the impact is. We think of sleep deprivation as meaning we're a little tired the next day, maybe a little foggy, but it's so much more than that.
It starts with the brain, right?
Right. Cognitively, poor sleep accelerates the decline in processing speed, work memory, and executive function that can come with aging. The research on this is actually pretty robust. People who consistently sleep fewer than 6 hours a night show measurably greater cognitive decline over time. And we've already talked about the glymphatic system and the connection to dementia risk.
So, emotionally, the picture is significant. The amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, becomes 60% more reactive in sleep deprived individuals. 60%, Don, that means the fight or flight response that the amygdalas are in charge of is they're activated. And so the irritability, the emotional volatility, and the reduced capacity to regulate frustration that some people attribute to getting older is probably a part of your sleep pattern.
And that's just the brain piece of the equation. There's also a cardiovascular picture. Chronic sleep deprivation is associated with significantly elevated risk of hypertension, high blood pressure, heart attack, and stroke. It promotes systemic inflammation, which is one of the primary biological drivers of accelerated aging across virtually every system in the body.
Metabolically, poor sleep disrupts your insulin sensitivity and the hormones that regulate appetite in a way that will cause you to gain weight and increase your risk of diabetes.
And it also affects the immune system, okay, your immune function. The research here is striking. People who sleep fewer than 6 hours a night are also significantly more susceptible to infectious disease than those who sleep 7 or more. Your immune system is doing critical repair and regulatory work during sleep, and when sleep is disrupted, that work also gets disrupted and in many cases isn't even done.
So, if you haven't put it all together yet, we're talking about your brain health, your emotional regulation, cardiovascular function, metabolic health, immune resistance, all influenced by the quality and quantity of your sleep. So, let's hear some guidelines for better sleep and learn what actually works because the science is compelling. And we'll talk about some ways of improving sleep quality as we age.
And I want to say up front, I've actually tried most of these. Some were easy to implement and made an immediate difference. Some required real habit change. Many of them I have not mastered, but all of them are grounded in the biology we've been discussing, which makes them feel less arbitrary and more like working to our own design.
So, we're going to start with the single most powerful thing anyone can do for their circadian rhythm, and that is da, 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 go outside in natural light the first hour you wake up.
This one really surprised me, and I'm not sure why, but it actually is really significant. What you're doing is sending the strongest possible "it is morning" signal to that master clock in your brain. You are essentially anchoring your circadian rhythm to the actual day, and that anchoring has downstream effects on virtually everything, including when your body will naturally begin to produce melatonin in the evening, which is what allows you to actually feel sleepy at a reasonable hour.
Don, as you were telling us about this fact of getting the first hour of morning light or going outside, so your body says, hey, it's light out there, reminds me of I used to watch my mom and dad. The first thing they would do is they had the electric coffee maker, and it would come on before they got up. They'd pour themselves some coffee and sit on the back porch talking to each other. But if you think about it, what they were really doing scientifically was they were telling their body, hey, it's morning, time to get up. But here's the thing, we need to do the same thing in the evening because we need to tell the body that it's time to go to sleep or that the sun is going down. So we reduce our exposure to bright blue spectrum light 2 to 3 hours before bed. And of course, if you're like me, Don, and you've got your screen on in front of you, like your smartphone and your iPad and things like that, that light emitted by phones and tablets and television screens suppresses the melatonin and tells your body, hey, it's still daytime, but your brain doesn't know that it's time to go to bed.
So, Christy and I pretty much mirror what you said about your folks in the morning. And I've always been kind of a morning person, so that works for me. But the night is where it becomes problematic. This is one of the places where I need to make some changes. I had at one time been a before the bed scroller, and I'm trying to give that up or at least significantly reduce it. And this is making a noticeable difference in how quickly I fall asleep and the quality of the sleep itself. These days, I generally have little trouble falling to sleep and am likely to be asleep within 5 minutes of my head hitting the pillow, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to stay asleep.
Falling asleep and staying asleep are two different things. But now that you know about setting the circadian rhythm, you've got to decide if you're going to do it or not. But you've got to be consistent if you do it. You really do need to make it a part of your day. Going to sleep and waking up at roughly the same time every day, including the weekends, is one of the most powerful things you can do to strengthen your circadian rhythm. And when we're consistent, all these biological processes Don and I have been talking about, the temperature shifts, the hormone releases, the glymphatic activation, begin to occur in a more coordinated and effective way.
What you're talking about here is really counterintuitive for a lot of people because we think the weekend is a time to catch up on sleep, right? Or a vacation. Sleep in, stay up late, be irregular. But irregular sleep timing is actually quite disruptive in the circadian system. It's the biological equivalent of giving yourself jet lag every week.
This is especially relevant to older adults. We've got to pay attention to our sleep environment. As we age, we tend to sleep more lightly, and that means that environmental disruptions that we may have slept through when we were 35 years old will wake you up at 65. Things like temperature, noise, light, all of these matter a lot more than they used to.
The research on temperature is particularly interesting. Core body temperature naturally needs to drop significantly. A cooler bedroom, somewhere in the range of 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit for most people, supports that process. And this is one of those evidence-based recommendations that feels good once you try it.
My wife loves to have a nice, cool room, but I found that she's right. You do go to sleep easier when your room is cool. And I know that we're all fighting with saving energy and keeping our thermostats and everything, but actually, sometimes what's good on that end may be interfering with your quality of sleep on your end. So we have to think about it. Don, here's a fourth one, and it's something I feel strongly about is to be thoughtful about alcohol. There is a myth that alcohol will help you sleep. And of course, we do know that you can feel drowsy when you drink. It actually does help you fall asleep faster, but it disrupts the quality that follows because alcohol suppresses the REM sleep where you do all of your dreaming. And it also interferes with the deep restorative stages that's most important for biologically cleaning out the brain.
For many people, there's a cultural ritual around a glass of something in the evening, and I'm not in the business of telling people what to enjoy, but understanding the actual effect that alcohol has on sleep architecture changed how I am thinking about timing and quantity.
I'm a moderate drinker myself, but I have found that it doesn't help me sleep better. I mean, that's true. Wine doesn't help me sleep better. Liquor doesn't help me sleep better. You got to work the timing of all of this if you want to have a great circadian rhythm. The fifth one, Don, is physical activity. We've talked about this on the show in other contexts. Regular, moderate exercise is one of the most consistently supported interventions for improving your sleep quality. It increases the proportion of time spent in deep sleep, and it reduces the time it takes to fall asleep, and it tends to reduce waking up in the middle of the night. The one caveat is timing. Vigorous exercise very close to bedtime actually stimulates your body rather than calming it down, at least for some people. And I happen to be a guy that does yoga around 6 o'clock in the evening, and sometimes I'm just amped up. I don't know what else to say. My body is saying, I'm ready. I may have to change that.
Yeah, this next item may be the most underappreciated of all, and that is managing what you let into your mind the hour before you sleep. I've come to think of the hour before bed as a transition zone, a decompression chamber, if you will, and filling it with news, with emotionally activated content, with work email, or anything else that engages the problem solving, anxious reactive parts of your mind is really working directly against your ability to sleep. David, what do you do before you go to bed?
I know that I'm supposed to not do what I'm doing, but I love action movies. I'm telling you, I love action movies. I love those kind of movies. Very immature, emotionally immature, I'm sure. But man, that is not good for your sleep. Watching the Thunder play, a nail biter game, oh, sometimes I go to bed and it's like, I know I'm tired, but my mind is still racing and active. And it's because I haven't given it that time that I need to do just to slow it down a little bit. Don, what should I be doing? Yeah, I need to listen to you on this one.
Well, okay, so I'm not the one to listen to. I don't do what you do, but the reason why I don't is because Christy will not let me. She gets
Oh,
really
okay.
wired by that kind of show, and so we just can't watch something like that. She knows that about herself. It doesn't seem to have quite as strong effect on me as it does on her, but I know in her case, it has a huge effect, and so we really have to pay attention to that. Finally, if you're doing many of these things and still experiencing significant sleep disruption, it might be a good thing to talk to your doctor. There are medical conditions like sleep apnea that are both underdiagnosed in older adults and profoundly disruptive to sleep quality. Sleep apnea in particular is worth specifically asking about because many people have it and genuinely don't know. Consequences of untreated sleep apnea over years are serious and very much worth investigating. And I just want to say that I had a young friend years ago who was in his early 30s who suffered from undiagnosed sleep apnea, had three little girls, and he passed away in his sleep in his early 30s.
This can happen. It's a serious thing. And look into it. If you find yourself snorting yourself awake and things like that, that's probably a sign that you need to go to a sleep study. Sleep is actually one of the biggest forms of self respect you can give your body. The hard thing for us as we age is we want to behave like kids. We want to remember the old days where we could stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning doing whatever we wanted to do, sleep for about 4 or 5 hours to seemingly no harm. But let's face it, that's just a myth. Older adults don't function like this. And even though I earlier talked about how I don't do what I ought to be doing right before I go to bed, I have had moments in my life where I did meditation before bed and just listened to quiet music and just did some light reading and things like this. And that was a much better thing for me. So it's really important that we think of sleep as something we do to respect ourselves. We covered a lot of ground today, the biology, the circadian rhythm, the consequences of practical steps. But the mind shift set, that's probably the most necessary. And if you've been dismissing your sleep for years, Don, maybe there's a few things we ought to tell our listeners that they need to hear before our program ends today.
Yes, and I think for me anyway, the big lesson here is that sleep is not a passive thing that happens to you. We don't think that about eating. We don't think that about working out or exercise. Sleep is no different. It's not something that just happens to you. It's an active practice, and choosing to protect it is an act of self-respect. It's saying my brain matters, my emotional life matters, my capacity to be present for the people I love matters, and I'm going to treat the conditions that support all of those things as non-negotiable.
And I also want to say that we need to do it not only for ourselves, but for the people we love, because this affects how we show up for the people we love. And part of being a senior and in the fifth season of life is knowing that these years, this fifth season of life really matters. And people will remember us more probably from this part of our life than maybe even the earlier parts of our life. So get the sleep you need so you can show up the way you should. It's time to prioritize it.
In a world that still glorifies busyness and treats rest as laziness, choosing to take your sleep seriously is an act of quiet defiance. And if there's one thing we've established on this show, it's that we are not afraid of a little defiance. This is such an important topic, and there's so much that we could not cover in this podcast that I've added that to our fifth season Facebook page. So if you want a few other ideas about things that you can do to help your sleep, check us out there.
It's a really good page. You should look at it. And if you're hearing this and thinking about the gaps in your own sleep, the habits that may have crept in, or maybe you're continuing to dismiss it as being important and just living without taking care of your sleep. I want you to know it's not too late. If today's conversation resonated with you, we'd love to hear from you, hear about your story. And if you know of someone who needs to take life a little more seriously, especially with their sleep, pass this podcast along with them. Hey, thanks for spending time with us, and we'll see you next week.
Take good care, everyone, and get the rest you deserve.